Yeah, and we're all together again. Time for the headlines from all of our newspapers. Mama B joins us shortly, but until then, blazing.
Yeah. Kojo, good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm great.
Excellent.
Your nickname is blazing.
Akablaze, so Akablazing.
Not like a nickname like everyone calls. It's his own creation, but I accept it from him as well.
He calls me Daddy Roro. I really don't like that name though.
I know you don't.
Yeah,
the bit about the blazing was back in school. They used to say that it means you are blazing,
Okay.
It was a bit uncomfortable. But Kojo doesn't mean that, so
at all.
Blazing.
I say it in a nice accent, so it doesn't sound like you are
smoking
illegal substances. All right, shall we do the headlines quickly and then settle for some of the stories? In the Ghanaian Times, FIFA mandates normalization committee to run GFA and organize election. Also, President welcomes German Chancellor to Ghana and then departs for state visit to China tonight. Also, stop burning e-waste at Aboglushi. The President orders. Sanitation, was that now? Also, by banner headline, government and clergy agree to tax churches for commercial activities. Right, Daily Guide has a few headlines as well. Let's have a look at that newspaper now. And the banner headline is Nana meets pastors and imams over free SHS and leaves for China. Pictures of some of the pastors on the front page. Also, Attorney General's office computers stolen. Mosquito and I need a whole lock horns over NDC post politics. And German leader arrives. That'll be today if she's not already here. My final newspaper this morning will be the Business and Financial Times. And I have these. Revoke licenses of idle oil block holders, ASEP tells government. Data bank not involved in any form of consolidation with any universal bank. Okay. And Freight and Trade Chamber supports CTN implementation. The final headline from the front page, and this is of interest, especially with recent headlines. Consolidated Bank assures of measures to reduce job losses impact. And perhaps we can look at the back page as well, where there are two stories. GEA seeks partner, I think it's GRA, seeks partnership with local government to determine increases in levies and taxes. Also, MoneyGram expands digital service and GCB Bank supports 23 medical
Is it really
students.
GEA they wanted to say?
I think it's the GRA.
Members of the Ghana?
Ghana's Employers Association.
Okay.
GEA. Oh, my mistake. Okay. Because I saw levies and taxes, I jumped to the wrong conclusion there. But yes, it's the Ghana Employers Association that are seeking this partnership with local government. And that's me.
We can take a look at the daily graphic on the front page. The president's meeting with the clergy dominating all the papers as expected. It says religious bodies to pay taxes. Government leaders agree. There's also Brexit will not affect UK-Ghana trade and mortality rate drops at CATH. And that is the Konfanochi Teaching Hospital. The back page has this story. It says, we'll transform Zongo's inner cities. It's according to the minister. His photograph is here. Dr. Mustafa Abdul Hamid, the minister for Zongo Development and Inner Cities. We can look at the Daily Dispatch now. The Daily Dispatch says, we agree with Kwesi Appiah, no player is bigger than Ghana. And some Ghana Water Company Limited managers dragged to Special Prosecutor's Office. And Obed's book on how Kofi Annan got elected as UN Secretary General comes along with a photograph of the late Kofi Annan. The back page has some sports stories. We agree with Kwesi Appiah, no player is bigger than Ghana, which was captured on the front page, also on the back page. The last one for me will be the Business Finder. The Business Finder says, private sector growth dips, city depreciation high, NPLs are major factors. An appeal to governor for your monies is also coming from a labor expert talking about what is due there, some dismissed workers, the severance package. And GNPC rejects conflict of interest accusation, also on the front page of the Business Finder. That will be it. I'm sure Roland will start off with there.
Yeah, so I'll do the last two papers, and I have the Today newspaper. It says no show at clergy government meeting on National Cathedral. We don't know whether the meeting really was on the National Cathedral in the first place, because it was not discussed, we're told. Complete abandoned health facilities, Baptist convention to government. The story is on page 3 of the Today newspaper. We also have a very interesting story, because on the front page, is it on the front page of the Business and Financial Times, we're told that the Consolidated Bank is assuring that they are going to introduce measures to reduce job losses, but at the same time they are telling those 1,700 staff of the collapsed banks to reapply for their jobs. Well, it's all part of the rationalization as it is. Leave our school now, Muscosa warns accountants. And those stories occupy the front page of the Today newspaper. We have the Daily Statesman as our last paper before we go into detail into some of the critical or topical stories. GNPC defense KK Sapong, the story, page 2 of the paper, over $7.5 million property deal. You have a related picture attached to the story. Dr. KK Sapong, he's the CEO of the GNPC. President Akufo-Addo hosts German Chancellor Angela Merkel. And, we also have the last story, NDC government to collapse data bank. Those are the stories we have. But very useful information is also the petroleum price indicators as of the 26th of August 2018. You can take a look at them if you are mindful.
I think we can do the details now. I'm sure Kojo should be interested in this religious bodies to pay taxes story.
In what form?
Okay, so their response is obviously in the story. So we are told that religious leaders have reached a consensus with the government on the need for churches and other religious bodies to pay taxes on their income-generating ventures. That was the outcome of a meeting between the religious leaders, including Muslims, Christians, and President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo at the Jubilee House yesterday. So you recall that the GRA had earlier talked about the fact that they intend to go after some of these religious leaders. But what is more important is that it's just on the income-generating ventures. So in terms of the law, they should have been paying already. But it appears some of them were not paying. In fact, over the past month where this discussion has come up, we've heard some religious leaders actually say that they actually pay on their income-generating ventures, whilst others suggested they were not even aware they were required to pay. So that has been clarified. The president using a different approach. Instead of maybe forcing the GRA to go out to enforce it, he's rather opted to engage the leaders, and they seem to agree, from what we've heard them say, that they ought to pay. So that's some additional funds coming into the consolidated fund for.
Yeah, but basically on commercial activity.
Yeah. So
but I think they already do pay.
This is why
they already do pay some taxes.
This is why I feel as if the headlines are a little bit misleading. The Ghanaian Times also says something similar.
Yeah.
Government and clergy agree to tax churches.
So the problem was that we had heard pastors people were not paying. That's a fact. People were not paying. So they were disregarding the law.
That's right.
So
it's not that they have come together and agreed, okay, we will
set
now
up introduce some tax. No,
we will now agree to be taxed. But they were already being taxed, but the churches were not paying. So I wonder whether actually we should look at some
of the churches were paying the taxes. If it became more noticeable that the activities they were engaged in were all more of a commercial venture. But let's take it for example. They write books all the time, and those books are sold through bookshops, and sometimes distributed in varied ways to their congregants or the congregation. The thing is, have they been willingly accounting for the sales of those books, etc.?
Indeed.
Because we know that the proceeds of those books goes into sometimes their associates, their consultancies, their companies, sometimes even of the individual church leaders or even the churches at the same time.
They sell CDs, they sell oil and water that they've prayed over and all kinds of things for money.
That's an interesting extension Kojo is bringing. I've not thought of the oils and
Yes, yes. I mean, it's all
CDs as
commercial.
part of-
If you're selling
it
it
is,
for
it
money,
is, but I've not really thought
you
of
should
it that
pay
way.
tax on
Well,
it. But for me, the interesting thing is that these taxes already existed.
Yeah.
Churches were not paying them. GRA was not enforcing it.
The-
So
the-
it
no,
may
no,
be.
the churches pay some sort of taxes if it was visible.
So the ones I'm talking about are the ones on these oils and water and CDs and books.
Yeah.
That
There's always
we've
going to
all
be an
said
argument
right
there.
here that the churches have not been paying these taxes. That's what I'm referring to. And I mean, I was thinking whether there's any rational reason to sort of go back and backdate some of these collections, because if we were paying out a salary or something, we would backdate it appropriately. I wonder whether we should think about doing that when it comes to taxes as well. When someone is found to have avoided tax or evaded tax and they are brought into the tax net, are they not supposed to go back and pay arrears?
Well, ideally, even with interest, yes.
Yeah.
There's always going to be this debate, and has always been around about the oils that they sell and whether what they are doing is a sale or it's just a token for perhaps a container which they put the water or the oil. You know, I don't know. There's
So
always going to be
some churches, for example, will go and buy just regular mineral water or purified water, pray over it, and sell the bottles to the congregation. Some churches do that.
It obviously is sold at a higher price,
Of course.
so they make some profit
Yeah.
on top.
Some churches sell oil. Sometimes they even brand the oil with a picture of the pastor and so forth. So all of this is commercial activity. You know, it's the exchange of goods and services for money.
It's an income generating
Indeed,
venture.
indeed. I wonder whether those pastors who also charge money for special prayers and so forth,
the consultations.
yes, whether that also comes, well, it ought to come under commercial activity, because yes,
It's a
you are,
token. You're giving something.
but it's
back.
it's not exactly a donation, because there's consideration, so it's a trade. A donation is when you give something without receiving any consideration in return.
I doubt whether the GRA or whoever is going to enforce these regulations or this agreement, so to speak, can enforce it.
But who will draw the line, you know, because they ought to
Yeah,
enforce it.
because right now as we're talking, the president hasn't drawn the line. That meeting that they went to didn't draw the line, and we also have not drawn the line.
But
we're assuming.
it's GRA's job to draw the line, and the question is,
Can they?
where will they make the decision to draw this
They
line?
can't. Religion is a very thorny issue. People become emotional when these
Yeah.
things are raised.
Ah, poor Obinim.
Just before Kojo comes in, there's this other story in the Daily Dispatch about how Kofi Annan was elected the UN Secretary General. For the younger ones like myself, you can grab a copy of the Dispatch, page 5. It's actually from Dr. Obed Yawa Samuel's book on political history of Ghana. So, you know, in it he explains how Boutros Aziz was not allowed. The US didn't want him to have a second term. So they thought an African should...
Boutros Ghali.
Boutros Ghali, that's right, yes. They didn't want him to have a second term, so they needed an African to have the second term. Yet he ended up having 2 terms, like we've come to know. So you can find details in the Daily Dispatch paper.
Okay, so let's look at the story about Dr. KK Sapon and a press release now coming from the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation about that decision of the management of the GNPC, of course, with some approval from the managing director or the CEO, purchasing $7.5 million worth property in Takrady. And I think the comment out there and the commentary has been that there seemed to be some conflict of interest issues, because the entity that they bought the property from, the CEO had worked with the entity and its related subsidiaries. So
But I think he has spoken about this on the Super Morning Show, and said that, well, he was well aware of this conflict, and so declared that there is a conflict, and recused himself from those transactions. Now, that is the proper way of declaring a conflict of interest. I think what we need to start educating people on is that when you declare a conflict, you don't automatically cure it. Even when you recuse yourself, you don't automatically cure the conflict, because there has to be, the entities have to take every measure to ensure that neither you nor anybody related to you benefits from the transaction. So even if you recuse yourself and there is still a way in which you or some person related to you can benefit from the transaction, then the cure has to go further. Perhaps the transaction might have to be cancelled or done with another entity, a different entity. That's how you properly cure
But
conflict
in
of
this
interest.
case, there was one problem that cropped up later on. They say that at an advanced stage in a negotiation, when they were supposed to effect payment, the lawyer for the GNPC was not readily available to provide some document because he was on vacation. And the company, Global Haulage, needed the money. So at that stage, the CEO, Dr. Keke Sapon, now comes in and says that, I mean, you are at an advanced stage, they need the money, you are the ones causing the delay, so go ahead and effect the payment. So that is at that stage that becomes...
Then, instead of, so he basically cancelled the recusal by
to an extent,
getting
because
involved.
he had stayed away entirely.
Right.
Then to that final point when
where
the
he
payment
suddenly got involved again.
in. Yeah, so that is
Right.
what people are
I
raising
think in
concerns
addition
over.
to the narrative, no matter what we say, the chief executive would have gotten involved anyway at the final approval process of payment.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
it depends on the amount, because it's not every amount that is approved by the CEO. Sometimes it's above him. Sometimes it's actually
it's not. I think
the procurement.
it's the transaction that is approved that goes above the CEO.
Yeah, but he
maybe
recused- he
maybe
recused
has to go
himself.
to the board. But
He
we're talking
recused
about
himself
you
from that
signing off
process.
a check.
I think Roland
to
is
say
talking about
the
access to
payment
the funds of the
or the
GNPC
payment,
itself.
saying that they pay.
So because I don't think they will just authorize the finance person
Yeah,
to just
yeah.
sign and disburse
But I
the
thought
funds.
you said that there was someone who was supposed to sign who wasn't there.
They needed documents
No,
from
it
the
wasn't-
legal
they
department.
needed documents, okay.
And
Wasn't
the
documents.
lawyer was on vacation.
Right.
Right.
I get
So
it.
because of that, the CEO says that it is your fault that your lawyer is not available. So you can't cause the company that needs the money urgently
Right,
to
right,
suffer
right,
as a
right.
result.
But
So go ahead and-
curiously,
okay.
if a lawyer or any member of the company or senior management of a company is on vacation, the person
Don't they
doesn't
do
leave a
handover?
isn't there somebody who will deputize or
It's a fair point, and that is why
Yeah.
for most of these organizations, they are supposed to have a legal department. So it's a department where you store the files. It should
Yeah.
be such that when you are not around, someone should walk into it and immediately you mention which matter they are negotiating on. They should be able to pick up a file and should be up to date and transact business.
Yeah.
But we clearly from this situation that appears not to be the case, and it leaves room for some of these suspicions.
A bit of clarification over the authorization thing. Once he is the only officer who has the power to authorize payments, that does not constitute conflict of interest. It's not like there's someone else, he can recuse himself from
for that person to
authorizing
authorize.
for someone else to authorize.
Yes, but the process
yeah.
leading to selection should not involve
It should not
yeah,
involve
should not
him.
influence it.
Absolutely right. But I think that in that education on conflict of interest, we need to try and do as much of it in the media as possible, because it's the cornerstone of corruption. But sometimes we don't even see its importance because our culture militates against it a little bit. You know, conflict of interest. You are my brother, so if I work here, I can't give you a contract. It almost seems absurd to some to some Ghanaians, but it is absolutely wrong. It is the cornerstone of corruption, because where do you draw the line? If you are able to benefit personally, privately from public office, or you or somebody related to you is able to benefit privately from public office, it is an abuse of that power, and it should never happen. You know. Okay. Shall we talk about Consolidated Bank?
Yeah.
They are assuring the public that they have some measures in place to reduce the impact of job losses. So they are not saying that there won't be job losses. They are not denying the 1,700 number that has been bandied around. But what they're saying is that they are going to try and put in place measures that will make the impact of these job losses a lot less. So some of the things they're talking about is that they are finalizing a plan for affected staff to transition to other economic models which will enable them provide essential outsourced services for the bank where appropriate. So basically they will become contractors to the bank. Some of them will become contractors to the bank. They talk about all other kinds of things that they will do to help the transition of these workers who are about to find themselves out of a job. So they say CBG informs the general public that it has established an integration roadmap with the objective of right-sizing the branch network and rationalizing headcount, among others. Now, while this may involve some reduction in headcount, management is taking steps to ensure this does not impose undue hardship on its staff. Now, the one thing they don't say is whether they are going to pay severance pay upfront immediately or whether there are going to be delays, as well as is the case with former staff of GCB and who had come there from UT and Capital Banks. Yeah.
I think more like former workers of UT and Capital Bank, because if there will be any severance, as far as Ghana Commercial Bank is concerned, from the period when they were employed, it will be just giving you a 1 month pay, and then your appointment is terminated.
Yeah, I've heard all the legal arguments around whose responsibility it is. I don't know whether I'm convinced one way or the other yet. The only thing I'm certain of is that it ought to have been provided for, because this transaction covered all assets and liabilities, toxic and non-toxic. So if you know you are going to have to pay severance, it's a liability, whether toxic or non-toxic. So it should either be covered by the new employer or by the bond. Either way, it can't just fall through the cracks as if you forgot about it. That I'm not convinced of.
Well, for me personally, I think that your argument and the argument by people who make same is more emotional than what the regulation should be. Because if you look at the responsibility after the liquidation process has been undertaken, it's first to make sure that the customers are protected too. If the assets thereof of the entity are supposed to be liquidated, auction subsequently after valuation to pay off whatever liabilities there are, then they pay the liabilities accordingly. The workers who were former members of the companies that have been liquidated will come down the lane, so to speak, will be of a last resort of a sort. Now you'll be paid, or your severances will be taken care of when there's enough. After all the processes have been going through, those who are supposed to be paid because they are owed will have to be taken care of.
Yeah, Roland, that would be the case if it was
because now we're speaking out of emotion.
That would be the case if it was a private entity that was winding up. So it's not actually about emotion, it's about getting it right technically. If a private entity is winding up, you bring a receiver, they will sell off assets and so forth, and then in a certain order, in a certain hierarchy, you pay off your creditors. This is not a company that is privately winding up. There's been a purchase and assumption. Okay, so the assets went somewhere, the liabilities went somewhere, and severance pay is a liability, so it went somewhere.
Well, definitely.
Yeah, so it's not emotional.
I think you and I are on the same line as far as what the liabilities are. The
but
thing is that we have a number of liabilities. Which one do you take care of?
The point
and the law has stipulated the ones that you take care of before you come to which ones becomes critical for all of us, because I think that we're all related to the parties one way or the other.
So like I was explaining, the issue of the receiver would come in if it's a private entity winding up, you bring a receiver, and then that is the receiver who will now come and pay the creditors. But in this case, the receiver is not the one who's coming to pay creditors. A bond was issued to pay creditors, to take care of all of those liabilities. A bond was issued. The receiver, whatever the receiver is able to retrieve, will go back to the bank, to the consolidated bank. Okay, it won't go to pay creditors. A bond was issued to do that. So that's the point I'm making to you, that this liability of severance pay ought to have been included in the bond, unless somebody simply did not calculate it when they were working out how much of a bond government should issue to cover liabilities. Do you see the point I'm making?
I get your point.
Yeah, so it's not really about emotion.
No, I think that it's more of an emotional issue, because
creditors are not queuing up waiting for the receiver to go and retrieve all the assets of Unibank before they get their money. Creditors are that exercise is not happening. Okay, so what I'm saying is creditors are catered for under the bond.
We do understand that the creditors
are why is severance pay not
now included? At the end of the day, it's a matter of which one becomes a priority. And as far as we're concerned, and I know that perhaps maybe people may be raising issues, and you are raising the issue with whatever it is that the the bond should take care of as far as the liabilities are concerned. But the workers would always be coming last. I don't see where the argument would always be.
That only happens when the receiver is the one paying people off.
But even in this,
that's not what's happening in this case.
Even in this instance, if like just go ask the right experts, and they will also be giving you the right.
The receiver is not the one paying off the bills.
Okay.
That is the distinction that must be made.
You need to go to the court to raise an issue with this subject. And
let's have a look at some of the headlines online.
Workers. You've been promoting this for some time now.
Let's have a look at some of the headlines.
Yeah,
some of the headlines on my JoyNews.
Could you have about 700 or 1,000 clients?
1,700.
He's just leading them. He's not a lawyer.
And another 700 from the first.
Lead a nice pressure group.
Yeah. I could.
Could you for workers of
yes.
defunct?
I stand by workers.
Could you for severance package?
All right then. Let's look at some headlines on myjoyonline.com. And broadcasters are concerned about Communications Ministry silence on digital migration.
Government releases plan for Kofi Annan's Solemn State funeral also on that website. We can do some more stories. It says Cape Coast youth turn storm drain into football field to check open defecation. Judas Iscariot's 30 pieces of silver and China's $1.6 billion salvation cost for Panda. Government to build e-waste recycling facility in Agbubloshi, also on the website. FIFA Normalization Committee to complete work by March 2019. That's according to the Information Minister designate. And Ed Sheeran won't release an album next year. It's also another story on my Joy Online.
He's gone on a hiatus.
Yeah.
We've seen musicians do that in history. So.
The last one here says staff affected in a Consolidated Bank of Ghana layoff to provide outsourced services according to management. I think that will be it for myjoyonline.com. Yeah.
Well, Angela Merkel is arriving in Ghana today for bilateral talks, and the president will be leaving for China later today. Yeah. Okay, we're done?
Yes, with myjoyonline.com.
Right. Okay, so we have to wrap up for sports, but we have a request here, and this one, Timothy Goba is sending some good wishes, as well as from the wife May and the rest of the siblings. They have Kosi and Setrako. This one is to Seduji Augusta Goba of the Martin de Porres Junior High School. It's your birthday today, and your family is wishing you all the best. They're saying that God continue to bless you in all your endeavors. All right, so that's where we transition to for sports, and Benedict also will be here with the latest sports headlines. Stay with us, we'll be right back.